Hello and welcome to the DMH Stallard Employment Law podcast. My name's Abigail Mayno and I'm a partner in the employment team at DMH Stallard. In this podcast, we'll be looking at the fascinating and to some frightening topic of AI and its interaction with employment law in the workplace. As our listeners will know, AI is a huge topic, so inevitably we won't be able to look at every aspect, but we'll instead look at some of the themes and considerations. We all know the use of generative AI and large language models has increased significantly amongst the general public. Applications such as ChatGPT have made the headlines, and with that comes risk and uncertainties as well as opportunities. So lots of things for us to consider in the employment sphere, such as data protection, confidentiality, discrimination issues, what the limitations are, whether there are inaccuracies and what we should, how we should approach those inaccuracies. And also how as businesses we should consider the opportunities and whether or not we allow our workforce to use that. And I'm delighted to be joined by two individuals who will be able to provide some insight into this topic. Andrew Hickey is an enterprise technology specialist. Andrew started his career at IBM and then worked in the technology, media and communication practices at Accenture and EY. He then also held Chief Technology Officer roles in the media and telecommunications industries, and more recently was the founder of data analytics company that was acquired by a US technology company, Commerce IQ. Andrew specialises in helping corporations with digital transformation and the adoption of emerging technologies such as generative artificial intelligence. And also Stephen Tenhove, a partner in our employment team at DMH Stallard. Stephen's work for his clients covers all aspects of employment law, both contentious and non-contentious, including the law relating to partnerships and shareholders and the recovery of proceeds of fraud. He acts primarily but not exclusively for employers and companies, and so is well placed to talk to us about some of the challenges and opportunities AI presents to employers. So with all that, in the introduction, I've mentioned a few buzzwords, generative AI, large language models, but maybe take a step back, I think, for our listeners to start with, and perhaps a simple question, may not be a straightforward answer, I don't know. And maybe, Andy, if you could explain, what is AI? Is this new? Is this new in the last couple of years, or explain to our listeners a little bit about AI?
Hi, Abigail, and thank you for the introduction. Well, I would say we've had some form of AI, artificial intelligence, for quite a while. Computer programs that provide us with insights into information we give them, and which might get done by ourselves by hand, but they're much better performed and much more quickly by computers. I'd call this analytical artificial intelligence. It kind of looks backwards and provides historical insight, if you will, into information that we give it. What's new, and it is quite new, very, very recently, is generative AI, which can actually create new information. It can create text, it can create audio, it can create images, it can create videos. And it's based on a new suite of algorithms, computer programs, that are called, at the risk of buzzwords, they're called transformers, and they're the T in ChatGPT. So that T at the very end of ChatGPT stands for transformer. And it's an algorithm that makes probabilistic predictions. They're very, very accurate because they're trained on huge volumes of data. For example, a snapshot of the whole internet, all the open source books that are available out there, and any information you choose to give them. And what I would say is now is really the very first time in human history that this volume of information has been widely available, and perhaps more importantly, instantaneously available globally. So the new algorithms are proving to be very accurate at probabilistic predictions that enable the creation of new content. And this is all very new, and it's within the last few years that we've got to a position where we can actually create algorithms that feed off that data and provide predictions. And that's what generative AI is.
Okay, that's really interesting. And where do you think the generative AI, because I think the cautious and the nervousness around AI comes from the generative AI side, and how accurate that is. I mean, there's lots of reports about the legal industry, about cases being cited in in submissions that are completely fictional. You hear all of the things that go wrong with generative AI versus, I think, what you were saying in your last section about it being actually really quite accurate. Is that dependent upon the information that's fed in to the algorithm? I mean, is it only as good as the information it's got to serve? How wide could it go, and where could it go in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of new technologies, we're grappling with a slightly new frontier. So I'm sure we haven't solved all the problems of how we use this new technology yet. What I would say, I mean, there's a truism in my industry, in the tech industry, that we kind of overestimate in the short term, but we underestimate in the long term. So right now, if you listen to your newscasts and the media, AI will solve every problem known to mankind. The truth is, it's a little bit more nuanced than that, and it makes lots of mistakes, and it makes lots of things that we would find simple look really complicated. But I think that's a short-term thing, and I can imagine over the long term, as the AI gets more and more refined, and we put more and more useful and accurate information in it, and we govern it appropriately, it will become more and more powerful and more usable. But I think having the artificial human in your kitchen cooking next to you is some way off. Having said that, having artificial assistants that really help you do your job, whether it be a white collar job or a manufacturing job, that is much more near term. And I think that's being used quite broadly across a lot of businesses right now. So yeah. I think it can go a long way, but we're making early baby steps with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was interestingly, I was looking at a survey that came out this week from a global technology provider that surveyed a relatively small number of global companies, but in the UK, about 75% of those that it surveyed had been deploying generative AI into the workplace, but almost all said it wasn't replacing jobs. It was, to your point, to enhance the productivity, but also one of the clear findings was that they were struggling with budgetary constraints, and I think that's one of the big things when employers are looking at it. Should, in your view, Andy, companies be developing proprietary AI, or should they be relying on products that are already out there?
Well, I think this comes really to core business strategy for organisations. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to protect your proprietary information, and you want to have proprietary business processes that help you to compete in the marketplace. And I think the concept of just using ordinary off-the-shelf ChatGPT to drive your business processes provides you with very little competitive advantage. So if you've got it, your competitors have got it. So I think the broad answer to your question is yes, there should be proprietary use of AI in corporations. I think if you look at McKinsey have got a good classification, which I quite like. They say that when you use AI, you should think about whether you want to be a taker, a shaper, or a maker. The taker says, well, I'll just use what's off the shelf and I'll help it improve some of my business processes. For example, maybe my call center people can answer questions more quickly by going to ChatGPT, perhaps. And you would be a taker there. You're using out of the box, ordinary consumer-based AI. The shaper refers to organizations that are feeding their proprietary information into a walled garden of AI, if you like, where they can provide information that is only theirs and is used in their business processes and their interactions with their employees and their customers. And a maker is somebody who creates AI from scratch. So they create a large language model. And I think only the very largest corporations will have the budgets to be able to do that. We know that big corporations like Google and Microsoft and Amazon are doing that. So the tech companies, I imagine that some large industrial companies might choose to do that kind of thing too, where it's very domain specific. But that you need deep pockets to do that, and it may not be appropriate for most businesses. But certainly shaping, providing and ring fencing proprietary information and business processes, and getting the AI to help you with those and to help your employees and customers, I think is something companies need to start thinking about now.
Thanks, Andy. So, Stephen, thinking about this in the context of HR, how can AI be helpful or perhaps not so helpful to HR teams? Are there any legal concerns that they should be thinking about, managing from your perspective?
Well, that's, I think, two questions, Abby. The first one is how AI might be used to assist employers in their day-to-day interactions with their employees. And I think that falls into two categories. The first is that it's particularly helpful, I think, when looking at people who are applying for jobs. And you can use AI to get through a large number of CVs. You can use AI to analyze people's skills. You can even schedule initial interviews by using AI. You can look at applicants' social media, background checks. And interestingly, there was an article in Personnel Today a while back that suggested that those who applied for jobs using AI enhanced CVs were likely to be more successful than those who did not, which is an interesting idea. So the AI works both ways. Applicants are using it and businesses are using it to analyze applicants. It also, I think, assists in during the employment process. It can most obviously manage shifts. It can carry out what would be described as mundane tasks. It can profile successful employees as opposed to unsuccessful ones. It can look at those who are underperforming and suggest other career paths for them within the organization. It can monitor employee activity both in the office and also outside the office. There are tools available to see whether people are working or not remotely. It can identify inequalities of pay or anything else, provided it has the relevant data. It can do all of those things. So potentially it's an enormously helpful tool. Then the other side of the question is, how does the law impinge on this? And I think it does in two areas in particular, most importantly and most obviously in discrimination. It may be that the data you have used to analyze applicants is itself flawed and simply repeats the past, perhaps, in a workforce which has been largely male, for example. And so it chooses candidates for jobs who are more likely to be male rather than less male. That's one of the fears. You can, when looking at the social media of applicants, you can see that some of them are trade union activists or have particular points of view that you don't particularly appeal to you. And you may decide not to employ those people, even though, of course, that they may be opinions that are protected by law. If you look at within employment itself, you decide to make people redundant on criteria which have been produced by AI, and it turns out those criteria are discriminatory or unfair in some other way. And so AI, I think, is something which raises a number of employment-related issues. Whether these can't be overcome or whether actually AI is any worse than the average human being is a different question. So I think it's particularly useful in hiring people and indeed in managing people. The real problems arise, as far as the law is concerned, in discrimination and perhaps in unfair dismissal. And
perhaps, as you say, if they are sort of monitoring outside the workplace, some general privacy concerns, rightly or wrongly, from employees as to how much they're being monitored and the extent of that monitoring. Very interesting. I wonder whether the statistics about AI applications getting through are because AI is screening the applications. It would be a quite bizarre world that we're entering into. If that's
Indeed, I'm not sure, but Amazon certainly had a problem 3 or 4 years ago where the AI that it employed to screen candidates initially was apparently based on a database that was largely masculine or had been in the past, and that distorted their choices for the people that they hired for roles in their warehouses. Now, I'm sure all of this is something which can be fixed and just needs a proper insight into the way AI operates, and HR departments who are alert to this can no doubt create the appropriate policies to ensure that these things are dealt with properly. And of course, there is another angle to this, which is the data protection angle as well, as you alluded to a few minutes ago, the question that you have to process data lawfully, fairly, and proportionately. And AI is unquestionably a form of data, and depending on how you wish to use the data, there is a GDPR element to this as well, which we can explore in a little bit more detail a little later on.
I mean, it's an interesting point, isn't it, Andy? Because it seems that AI, and from what you said at the start, it hoovers up information that's out there. But if what's out there is biased towards one thing or another, such as Stephen's example, as to very male-heavy applicants, it is going to produce results based on the data that's inputted. Is there any way, around that? How do you prompt the systems to give you a bit more of a neutral blank canvas, if you like?
Yes, I mean it's a real challenge, isn't it? I think like most adoption of new technologies, there are two big pieces that companies need to think about and HR departments need to think about, and that is training and governance. So I think training is making sure that there's a congruent understanding across the organization and specifically within HR about what AI is and how it can be leveraged within the organization, both the good and the bad. In terms of getting more valid and aligned information out of AI, that's really about asking questions in the right way and about providing it with proprietary information, which also tunes the answers to those questions. So getting questions in the right way has this broad phrase that is the lingua franca of AI at the moment called prompt engineering. And it's really about honing in your questions from a broader to narrower, so you get more accurate information out. So, for example, if you do not want it to prioritize males over females in a job selection, you need to specify that in the right way in order for it to tune its answers for you. So, and that requires training. It's not straightforward. It's not something that people necessarily naturally would do in their interactions with other humans. So there's a prompt engineering training, there's understanding what AI is and what the constraints are. But I think, there are many opportunities to use it to really improve productivity, and it's going to require that training and the governance. On the governance side, I think a lot of organizations, as they went through the digital revolution, left it to the IT department and then realized many moons later that it needed to have a decision-making structure at the board level. And I think thinking about how one puts the right governance structures into organizations to make sure that the do's and the don'ts of using AI are well understood up and down the organization and have a decision-making authority with a final yay or nay on whether you can use it in a certain way or not is quite important. So there's the governance and the training.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much a strategic decision for an organisation rather than individual pockets of the business doing their own thing. Because one of the challenges is that it is accessible now, particularly the taker form, the ChatGPTs, people can get at it, people can use it, and organisations are going to need to take a view on both their strategic use of it, but also their staff and how they use it in their day-to-day functions. And I suppose as an extension of governance, there's the consideration as to whether we should have policies in place for the use of AI within the workplace. Do you have any views on this, Stephen? Is it a good thing?
Policies will be essential. Andy has set out the issues from the company's perspective or the business's perspective on what you should be thinking about. I see no reason why something similar to that shouldn't be put in a policy so that your employees and other stakeholders know what you will use AI for, and if you like, in what order you're going to make your decisions. The other thing that needs to happen, I think, is that the policies need to be renewed with AI in mind. As you rightly said a couple of minutes ago, AI works in two ways. From an employment perspective, employers use it to deal with their workforce, but of course their workforce also uses it on a daily basis, and so you'll have to police and therefore require a policy for both. It seems to me you need to discuss with your workforce how you're going to use AI and have a principled policy that shows how you're going to do that, but you're also going to have to do the usual things that we've done in the past about the proper use of mobile phones, apps, and that sort of thing, now that these are also populated by AI apps. And of course, you are, although it's not strictly speaking an employment question, if your employees are using those in the workplace, they may be in breach of the very licenses that they've agreed to enter into with the app provider. So you may find that you have all sorts of difficulties there. So yes, you will have to put out the policies in place. And of course, we spoke about GDPR a few minutes ago, data protection. How are you going to use AI to look at applicants or to manage your workforce if you don't have their consent to do so, or you have a legal reason to do so, particularly where decision making is automated, as I think it's bound to be in the initial part of a large-scale recruitment exercise. So I think those are issues which really need to be set out, and there's nothing to be feared here. I think you just show your staff as usual in a well-drawn policy how you're going to implement something, what the criteria are, and you discuss it with them.
And of course, the other side is, as you rightly say, they will be using it for their work, and if they're using it for client information, whether that's breaching that confidentiality, but I know ChatGPT sort of holds on to it, and it goes up into the ether, and so there's privacy issues there from an organisational perspective. So
Indeed.
Important to get the policies in place and the parameters around use. And it's obviously going to be a really, well, we all hope it's going to be a very useful tool in terms of productivity, and you can see from an HR perspective that it's going to be hugely helpful potentially in activities such as if there's a company at a corporate acquisition and the HR team are having to trawl through a lot of information from a due diligence perspective potentially, or looking at contracts that for incoming employees into the organisation, just as an example, and AI doing a lot of that analysis for them. But AI is not perfect, and AI can occasionally get things wrong, probably in a lot less of a frequent nature than humans would get it wrong. But I think that, and certainly when the three of us were talking before this podcast, we were talking about the standards we hold AI to, and whether that is reasonable or not. How do you reconcile human error, which could be, let's say, I don't know, 5%, 10%, whatever it might be, with AI that might be 0.01%, but that's going to be seen as catastrophic potentially, or hugely more damaging than the human error? I don't know to what extent we should be worried about that, address that, think about that? Andy, do you have any views?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said at the beginning, we're on a bit of a learning curve with this, aren't we? I mean, I think, 2 points I would make. One is, I think the final decision in anything that is ultimately impactful needs to lie with us as humans, right? Us as managers in a business and us as humans in our day-to-day lives. So I think it's good to get into the line of thinking that AI is an assistant, not a decision maker, which I think helps us to arbitrage and triage the outputs that it gives us. That's not always going to be easy, but I think it's an important nuance to AI, not thinking that it's going to replace decision making in the same way that analytical AI did not do that. Second of all, we hold computers to very high standards. For example, I mean, if a computer drives a car and has an accident, we are shocked by it. Yet humans, we would expect to have many accidents in their driving careers, mostly dings and things, but so our tolerance of computers failing is very, very low, partly because we don't feel completely in control of them. And so therefore a computer making a mistake is something we're not in control of. I suspect, and again, it's we overestimate in the short term, underestimate in the long term. As we get to the long term, computers will trust them more. They'll have earned our trust more, and will release more important roles to them. But I think right now, as we sit here in 2024, they're our assistants, and they can be better and better assistants. They might even be the best personal assistant you've ever had. But ultimately, the decision needs to be with you when it comes to those big, important, game-changing decisions.
I think there's an important issue here with law as well, because law essentially depends on human actors who do things for particular reasons, and what they do is either right or wrong, and if it's wrong, it's illegal. So, for example, in the spheres of discrimination and unfair dismissal, what you're looking for is for an actor. If you look for someone who has directly discriminated against someone, you're looking for someone whose mindset has decided to discriminate against someone. What happens if that mindset is a computer's mindset? Where do we root what the person, how do we root what the person's thinking was if it was a machine that decided to discriminate? Likewise, if you indirectly discriminate against someone, it's thanks to the Supreme Court's a recent decision of the Supreme Court. It's now fairly straightforward for someone to show a disparate impact. But if you're an employer and you want to show that it was a proportionate means of achieving a reasonable end, then you're going to have to, if you have to rely upon a AI to provide that reason, you're going to be in trouble. If I want to make someone redundant, but I've chosen them from a pool of individuals because their performance is poor, but their performance has been solely decided by AI, again, you're going to be in trouble as an employer, because you're not going to be able to show that you've been reasonable in choosing that person to be dismissed for redundancy. To just use a couple of examples of how what Andy says, you need to root, I think, the final decision in a person who has thought about it as a person. And the reason for that is that law remains dependent upon what people do and what their reasons for doing it are.
Absolutely.
There's a very interesting debate going on in the Silicon Valley AI community at the moment, which is, the people who have generated a lot of these algorithms don't always completely understand why they generate the output that they generate, i.e. it's not as transparent and analytical process, a computing process, that it would have historically been. So the thinking is actually what we really need is independent third parties and independent bodies and governance oversight, so that other AI can be used to explain why a piece of AI has made a decision. So that almost sounds like, a poacher and gamekeeper, but it would have to be independently generated, independently governed AI that can interrogate the AI that you're using about how and why it got to the decision it got to. Because it's not easy for humans to unpick that decision making now that the AI has become so powerful. So there's a debate going on in Silicon Valley about that, how realistic that is, how that will play out, I don't know. But it's a very valid concern because even the technology creators themselves have got that concern.
Yeah. And I think that is one of the things that, will be fascinating to observe in the next, short, medium term as to how we police, how we regulate AI, because as you say, Andy, some of the people that created it don't even understand, their capabilities. So that can make it quite daunting for us to deal with. Stephen, what and I know this is a very large question, so feel free to précis it. The regulatory landscape we're currently in at the moment, and whether there will be any impact on that with a change of government, if we have one, after the next election. Will that be? What does it look like? What does that mean for HR?
It's a very simple question, Abby. There is no change in the regulatory landscape. The Conservative government has no plans to change any fundamental aspect of employment law as a result of the rise of AI. The Labour Party does not appear to either. There's no mention of it in its January policy paper on employment law, and there's nothing in its manifesto either. The Conservative Party has said that it believes that, or should I say the government has said that it believes that the current regulatory environment is sufficient to deal with these points. So the Information Commissioner's Office for GDPR, data protection issues, and the other committees who deal with employment are sufficient at the moment to do so. And my understanding is that the Labour Party also agrees that that is the case. So there's a general consensus that the existing statutory landscape is the regulatory landscape can deal with AI. Whether that turns out to be the case in the long term remains to be seen. I mean, certainly in Europe, the European Parliament has recently passed a regulation on AI, and it seeks to classify AI into different types of, I think the best word is how sinister they are, and it reserves the right to make illegal particularly sinister types of AI. But although it's just passed this law, it doesn't come into effect until 2026. And even then, it is to be implemented through the member states, despite the fact that it's a regulation, and strictly speaking, it doesn't need to be put into law through the member states. So I sense that the EU is also seeking to feel its way in this and see what happens. There is already a law about the use of platform workers in the EU. That's people like Uber who operate through shift systems, which are done on a platform, which is quite interesting. But again, this really hasn't got going either in the workplace. So we are very much wait and see, I think. And in the same way that we have followed Europe.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that no one wants to stick their neck out, Europe, America, UK, on regulation with AI when it's potentially going to be quite a lucrative industry for those who want to invest in it. So it's that sort of tension between getting the investment and the growth in that particular country or region and regulating it. I suppose the $1 million question, and the one that a lot of employees will be concerned about, depending on the type of work they do, is whether AI are going to take all their jobs. Do we believe what we read? There'll be no more jobs. as it, whatever Elon Musk says, that we'll just sort of sit at home and let the machines do everything for us? Or will there be more of a gentle shift to things? I suppose that's a nice way to end things on. Andy, do you have any views on that?
Well, like most technology adoption curves, I think there are opportunities for enormous productivity gains. I think they've traditionally been in back office jobs, and AI will shift those gradually more to sort of front office, customer and employee facing roles. But history tells us that we create new jobs with new technologies in place. I mean, there used to be thousands of telephony operators in the 50s and 60s. None of those jobs exist anymore. Maybe there's a handful now, I don't know. But new jobs have been created. So I have a very positive view of it. I think we will find ourselves being more productive with very good assistants who can boost our own capabilities. And I think that will happen in lots of corporate functions. I think it could happen very well in HR departments, where having assistants who really help you understand some of the more arcane elements of employment law and policy while you're interacting with your employees feels to me like a productivity boost opportunity for HR, as an example, right? So I don't feel doom and gloom that all jobs are going to disappear. They will change and they will shape differently, as with previous technology curves, I think.
Stephen, do you have any differing views?
I don't. I share Andy's view. I think that we will find new work for people to do. And I do think it's interesting that the AI to date has apparently impacted most on repetitive jobs, particularly dealing with data inputting and things like that. It's going to move upstream, I would say, into the legal and insurance areas as one of the areas of the economy where it's thought it'll become increasingly important. And I wonder whether, as those more white-collar jobs become threatened, people may start to want AI to be regulated more vigorously than it currently is. But we'll wait and see for that. Because yes, when I started as a solicitor, I had a full-time secretary, no computer, mobile phones were a dream, and I'm still here, and I expect most other people to be as well.
Excellent. And the good people of McDonald's can rest easy this week, because their AI is paused because of their bacon topped ice creams. So a little way to go, I think, in terms of it taking over all of our jobs, which is a positive way to end, I think. And I think I've certainly taken away a lot of interesting bits from our chat today. I'm very interested in the McKinsey definition of, or reference to AI as whether you're a taker, a shaper, or a maker, and perhaps organizations now thinking a little bit more about how and when they move from being takers of products to shapers of products for their proprietary information. I think from a strategic perspective, that's something that I can certainly see growing and being more or being higher up the agenda for boards as we go forward. But for HR, the opportunities in automating some of their processes on the recruitment side and the management of their employees, as you mentioned, Stephen, sounds fascinating, within the legal constraints that we all know will be there and will govern. So understanding, as you said, Andy, the training and the governance around the use of AI in the workplace, the policies, the understanding, the leveraging, prompt engineering, asking those questions in the right way is going to be really important moving forward. And delighted to hear that it's going to be our best assistant, but hopefully not taking all of our jobs. I think that's an excellent way to end. So thank you both for your valuable contributions, and thank you all for listening.